if you want to actually have a audience in the modern marketplace for writing, this video is mandatory. So no matter how much you write, if you don't figure out this stuff, nobody's going to want to read your book. And it's going to be your fault. So unless you want to waste your time, figure this stuff out first. In this playlist, I've done a few videos, and now we're at the point where you're actually about to start writing. But this is mandatory. Everything else you can do and half-ass, but this stuff you have to get done properly. So, who am I? I'm Keanu Eugene, and I've written almost 2 million words, and luckily everything I'm about to discuss, I figured out in the first day I was writing, because I did 112,000 words in my first 36 hours. It was terrible, but let me figure out all this stuff immediately. And over the next 2 months, I studied everything that I'm about to share with you now, so you can shortcut it. I did 18 hours of research every day for 2 months, and then I started writing again. Okay, so 2 million words, all of which is available, well, most of which is available publicly on my web novel through my stories. They started with elementals, and then they're working all the way up to binary, so you can see my progress in the links below for free. Here, it will take you to my profile, right? So you can see that I'm not just talking out of my ass. I've actually done this stuff. So now I'm just going to distill everything down in this playlist, and we're going to go from planning and understanding what writing is in the very first video to this video, which is syntax, writing style, and prose. And then at the end of the playlist, we would have written an entire story live, edited, breakdown, and posted publicly for you. So all my links are below, and including timestamps and the link to this page, so you can just look at this cheat sheet every time you're going to get lost, or you're considering writing, or you're just refining your style. Just look at this cheat sheet. It's very easy and will simplify everything. But this video will break down everything even more and let you know my thought process on not only writing, but how to actually attract an audience, because that's something I've done fairly well. I've managed to go semi-pro at this, and now I'm aiming to go full time with my originals. So let's start with syntax. Syntax, in simple terms, is how you put words and symbols together to make a sentence. This is what prose writing is. Prose writing is just storytelling writing. Okay, and I'll get into the difference between prose and script later on. But for now, we're going to keep it very simple. So, foundational information, right? The most important thing in this entire video is stay consistent. No matter what you do, even if it is grammatically incorrect or simply wrong, if you are consistent throughout your entire story or project, your audience usually can just give you a pass if everything else is good, right? Some stuff is expected, so we're starting A, capital letters, right? So I'll write it out here, and then in brackets will be the full word for what it is, if you're going to read the document alongside me. So, for proper names of people, places, objects, items, events, and the beginning of a sentence. This is very simple grammar rules for, I'm fairly sure, every linguistic and every alphabetical language. Cyrillic languages with symbols may be a bit different, but we'll get to those afterwards. Full stop ends a sentence, phrase, passage, or sequence, right? Comma signals a small pause. So, hi, comma, my name is Keanu Eugene, right? When I said comma and I froze, that was the comma, right? Ellipsis. Okay, we're getting into the first technical definition here. Signals that information goes unsaid and can be solved via context clues. Draws attention to subtext. I'll do a whole 2-3 videos on subtext, not in this playlist, but in my regular videos. Now, unless you understand how to write subtext, use it sparingly, if at all. Too many people use ellipsis and they don't know how to write subtext, so they just fill their book with it, and it makes no sense. This happens a lot in some of the books I've checked out, right? They have a page filled with ellipsis and end dashes and semicolons, and it just sucks. Because if your ellipsis signals to your audience that everything around the ellipsis tells you what the ellipsis is, right? If a character says something like, yeah, that's not the way to go, it signals, oh, they know the way to go. That's a very simple example, and a lot of books don't do that. So think of ellipsis as the obvious thing, right, to either the characters or the audience, but mainly the characters, that goes unsaid. Okay? And the subtext video will capture this way more. That wouldn't be in this place. That would be a separate video because it's not mandatory to write your first book. This place is only about what you need to write your first book. Now, all caps, all capital letters, generally not used in prose, right? But occasionally I'll use it. So it's a personal note. I will use it to signal a big or sudden change, usually via sound effects such as a bang, like in a comic book, because I grew up on comic books. So I use it in a separate line by itself to signal to the audience something has changed. We're transitioning to a different part of the scene. It takes skill to use, right? And you have to stay consistent with it. So your audience might be jarred the first time you use it, but if it's something that you intentionally do repeatedly throughout a book, they'll get used to it. I also use it sometimes to signal when like a super move is being used, but that's a personal thing and a fantasy genre thing, combat genre thing. But for the most part, people generally don't use it. So be very intentional and consistent with when you use it. Okay? And I'll show you my legend of how I lay out all these things at the bottom of this document. Bold text. Don't use bold text. I'm just telling you now, do not use bold text. Put this as a hard rule. Everything else here is flexible for your writing style except this. Actually, except this and one other thing. Don't use bold. It should be avoided because if your book is being printed like this, right? Not all printing companies will properly do bold text. So if you're depending on bold text, sometimes it just won't be there. That's all. It simply will not be there. Some printing agencies won't support it, and some of them won't even tell you, right? Your book will just appear with no bold, and your audience will be confused. And if your book is digital, it's even worse because some software, like my screen right now, has night mode on for my eyes not to get damaged and to prevent me from needing glasses, hopefully. But many softwares that come on tablets and computers will change the font and put on custom fonts and colors that remove bold because it makes it more comfortable for people who usually need glasses. It'll help them read longer without their eyes straining or hurting, right? And one of the things it removes is bold text, and we'll get to the other one it removes most of the time lower down. So bold is the first thing that I'm telling you, right? Do not use it, because trust me, I've studied this. You want as many people as possible reading and understanding your books. You do not want to limit your audience because you're already trying to make it in an industry that's saturated and getting more saturated every single day. So why limit your audience from the people who will read your book when marketing is already so difficult, right? Exclamation mark. For yelling or loud occurrences, it replaces the full stop. You do not stack exclamation marks and full stops. You pick one or the other. Question mark. For asking or inquiring in dialogue or narration. You can use it in narration, right? But it has to be intentional. Again, I'll explain that later on in another video when I'm doing the sentence structure, which is the next video. It replaces a full stop. So again, question mark and full stops do not go together, one or the other. Here's a little slightly controversial one. Interrobang. Brandon Sanderson famously does not use this because he says it feels too much like a comic book. I love comic books. I grew up on comic books. So I use interrobangs, which is question mark followed by exclamation. So it's a very loud question. Again, not industry standard. Signals that the question is being asked loudly. Most writers add he yelled in the dialogue tags when they only use a question mark, or he screamed if they only use an exclamation mark, right? So they use one or the other and use the dialogue tag, which I'll break down in my next video, dialogue and descriptions, to fill in the blanks. I use interrobangs because I like to keep my dialogue moving forward, and I just like how comic books have it with a big question mark whenever something shocking happens in one of those old Batman comics. I just think it's fun. So it's a personal style choice. 100 written out in numerics, which means the numbers, not the word 100, right? Numbers written in numeric form are generally, from what I've seen, not used. But it isn't really a strict rule. If you get an editor who says change it, you could always tell them to stop bothering you about it, right? Tell them you don't want to change it. But if you do it or don't do it, remain consistent. So pick one or the other. You can do it for specific domains within your book. So if you do all measurements with the numerics, right? So 100 feet would be 100 ft. Keep it consistent. And if you spell it out, keep it consistent. But if you do measurements like that, and then you do like a soldier tag number, and it's always spelled out, right? Like 1 dash 3 dash 5 dash, well, hyphen, right? Then you have to keep that consistent too, so the people will be able to tell which is which. Again, consistency is the key. 100 in long form. Again, this is usually what people use. If you prefer numerics, keep it consistent, but this is what I would consider industry standard, but the industry is getting worse every day, so do we really want to keep to their standards, right? Okay, now we're going to get to some controversial stuff, because I'm going to talk about AI a little bit here, and why you shouldn't use things because your book will look like AI. Hyphen, which is dash, right? Short dash, used to join two things, but is mostly used as a crutch to fix bad sentences or paragraphs. If you use this to join two things because your sentence is running long, do better. This isn't a personal attack. I believe in you to do better than you're currently doing. Your sentences can be structured better than you're currently structuring them, right? And I am judging you if I'm reading this, because as soon as I see a bunch of dashes and I think, oh, look at this. ChatGPT told this person how to write, right? Even if I know your book isn't AI written, I'll just assume, okay, yeah, people are going to think your book is AI written. And AI is kind of invading the publishing industry right now. So the further you can separate yourself, the better. And the next one is even worse. M dashes, long dashes, right? People love to use these to add an extra little bit of detail to a sentence. Stop doing that. Your book looks like a computer wrote it, right? Because terrible writers do this a lot. And ChatGPT samples from the big pool of writers, and most of them suck. So it does this a lot. So you get lumped with AI and terrible writers. So do you want to be considered AI or a terrible writer? Yeah, not a good choice, right? So just learn to write better sentences. And I'm gonna get some pushback on this, but I don't really care about the people who think I'm wrong on this. They're just not as good. That's all I'm gonna say. Yeah, like you can be good at a lot of other things, but in sentence structure, if you're using these as a crutch, you can do better. You have so much room for improvement. It is mostly used as a crutch to fix bad sentences or paragraphs, yes. It signals a sidebar in dialogue or narration. That's its second use, okay? For this use, it's okay if you use it properly, but most people don't know how to use it properly. So this means that you're effectively whispering to the audience before continuing the main sentence, right? So the narrator would say, Jim went left, M dash. He didn't know there was another option, dash, and followed the route, right? So the he didn't know there was another option is you whispering something to the audience. Then you go back to the focus. Characters can also use this in dialogue, but it's a bit janky. So generally, the personal note is how I use them, or use something, or how I view it personally, right? So I don't use M dash because I believe that that's a signal that someone isn't good at making sentences, and your job is making sentences and stringing them along, right? Enough to make a book. ChatGPT and other AIs love dashes because they string together sloppy sentences. If you don't know how to connect two sentences or make them flow, you add a dash, and that's the end of it, right? That's the crutch. Using a lot of dashes makes your writing appear like AI, which will eventually replace bad writers. So cut the bad habit now. Alexa Mosey has gone on record on saying AI will replace bad copywriters. And I believe AI will replace, eventually in 5 to 10 years, AI will replace bad prose writers. So all the people flooding the industry with terrible half-written books, right, are going to get replaced. ChatGPT will be able to write a better book than them. So you need to aim to be the top 1%. If you're in the bottom 60%, you won't exist in 5 years because a computer could write it better than you. Because if you aren't aiming to improve to get the top 1%, AI is improving faster. That's its whole thing. The more people write, the faster it learns to write. And most people write terribly. So it's just going to be terrible for a long time. So you need to get ahead of it now, before it starts to progress really quickly. So in my writing, I use hyphens, right, which is the short dash, to signal direct information to the audience to remind them of specific details. For example, and here I have as the example, Clark Kent, dash, right, space then dash, Superman, dash, and that's the end of it. So the narrator would be going, Clark Kent, dash, Superman, look to his left, right? which would be used to remind the audience that this person has two identities. When I was writing Horizon, anytime somebody is in their hero costume, I would have the narration use their hero name. So it would be like Horizon said. But if he's not in his hero costume, I would say Law said, because that's his actual identity. But for some lesser known characters or characters who aren't as familiar to the audience, I would say their hero name, and then I would say dash their identity. So people would connect, okay, this person is this person. This is very intentional, and this is the only place I would use it aside from the next one, which is measurements, right? So down here you see 10 meters dash 33 feet dash, right? I use it when I give measurements to accommodate everyone regardless of where they're from, because I got some comments that were like, oh, how much is this in meters, or how much is this in feet, or like kilometers to miles. And in my head I can translate them easily because I studied architecture and stuff. But for some people, they have to like tab out and Google like conversion. If I give specifics, generally you should lean away from giving too many of these specifics, but I like them, so I do them, right? And it was part of the post system too. So generally I just accommodate people and like let them enjoy the story without having to go to a different tab and Google a conversion from meters to feet, right? So that's how I do it. And even in dialogue, people know, okay, the character isn't actually saying this part out loud, it's just for me, and then they can keep writing. But again, stay consistent with your rules. You can break or change or invent new rules if you want, but stay consistent from the first page to the last page of your book. And if it's a series, from the first book to the last book. You don't get to change the rules between books. Now, here's the part I'm going to get the most pushback on, because terrible writers love these things. Semicolon, right? They love M. National, they love semicolons. Semicolon, used to join two things, but is mostly used as a crutch to fix bad sentences and paragraphs. AI, ChatGPT loves semicolons. If you ask it to write anything, you'll find like 5 of these per page. Dashes too. So there's a running joke in my Discord where every time I see a page, they just know I'm gonna stop and look at all these semicolons and dashes and be like, oh, look at that, ChatGPT. They asked ChatGPT to write this chapter for them, right? Because making sentences is all your job is, and if you can't make them without these, you're probably not that good at it, right? Everything else can be great, but at a glance, these things stand out on a page, and if at a glance people have to figure out if something is AI or not, and they see this, which AI loves to use, they're going to throw you in the AI basket and nobody's going to read your book. That's literally how it's going to be. That's how competitive the industry is, because you aren't just competing with other writers who either are better or are writing more. And in my case, I'm pretty good and I'm writing more than most people, right? This is what I do all day, every day. I just sit here and I write. And you're using this, which looks like AI. Do you really think someone's going to pick up your book and randomly flip that page and then decide this is good quality? So you should cut out that habit immediately. Colon is used to signal the start of a list. It can be used in narration but should be avoided in dialogue. Use this very sparingly. If you have a list, I would sometimes sit there for like 5 minutes trying to restructure a sentence so I don't have to use a colon to start a list. And I've come up with some creative ways to structure a list in dialogue, because I don't like to use exposition for this, in dialogue, and I'll go through the sequencing when we get to that video. But personal note, I don't use semicolons because I believe that's a signal of someone that isn't good at making sentences. As I just said, ChatGPT and other AIs love dashes because it's string together sloppy sentences, so it's an easy way to like get a project done without thinking too much. And then we get to the dialogue section, which is the part that I need to pull you all aside for, because there are some rules going around the internet that people don't realize are very outdated and will get you in some trouble, right? So industry standard for traditional publishing, and I have these sections off so like you understand which part relates to which. Now, standard quotes, right, which is the double quotes, can be used for dialogue. Single quotes is traditionally used for dialogue, but I use it for inner thoughts. And the reason I'll say this is because I flipped to a Joe Abercrombie book, and he had dialogue as single quotes. And then in Sanderson book, he has similar things. And then in other books, you would see double quotes for dialogue, right? And this isn't a matter of this is what the industry expects, generally speaking. Single quotes for spoken dialogue, and italics for internal thoughts, right? For in somebody's head. So, but there are problems with this. Italics in a lot of digital media won't appear. For example, I write a web novel, and for a lot of web novel, italics doesn't appear. Same with bold, right? And again, those eye comfort settings I spoke about earlier, those programs that people run their books through so it doesn't hurt their eyes, damage their eyes because they're reading for long, often removes italics because it changes the font, right? So you're adding something to your book that isn't going to appear for some of your audience and it's going to leave them confused. So why would you even want to do that? So just don't start it. Standard quotes and single quotes, you can change them, flip them around however you want, but just keep it consistent. Nobody really bats an eye at that. Once they figure out which is which, if you keep it consistent, they'll be fine. But for the italics one really annoys me because traditional publishing doesn't seem to realize this fact yet, right? People have eye comfort apps and settings that removes dialogues and bold and those kind of stuff. So I recommend just avoiding it unless you are absolutely sure people are only reading your book in the printed format. And the printed format is not where you're going to make your money if you're now starting your career, right? You might hit it big, but for the most part, ebooks is how you wanna angle your career, your marketing. No. As I said, standard and double quotes. Pick one and stay consistent. Italics for inner thoughts, and in some cases, emphasis. Okay, this is another thing. This is what we're gonna get to in a minute. Emphasis means intonation, which means if you italics the he in I never said he hit her, it says I never said he hit her, which means, oh, the he is the wrong part of the person's assumption, right? So somebody else hit her, but she got hit. Don't do this if you are using italics for inner thoughts. Because if you have italics, meaning somebody's thinking in their head, and then it randomly appears in dialogue, right? Some people might just genuinely just think the he is in the person's head, and the sentence is actually, I never said hit her, which confuses things. So that's what I'm going to talk about afterward with teaching people how to read your book, right? And your writing style. So, the personal note for this. I use standard quotes to signal dialogue, single quotes for inner thoughts, and italics to signal telepathy or chanting. I always consider if my book is going to have both, so I decide which is which before I start writing. So this is a power system thing, so everything ties together. Deciding how you are going to use it before you start writing is important, so do that and stick to your rules. People will adjust generally after the first 3 or 4 pages. So again, consistency is the key. Because I write in present tense, some people will open a book, see present tense, and just close and never touch it again. But if people read a lot, generally they'll be like, okay, I'll power through the first page or 2, and if you can stay consistent and make it engaging at that early, then they'll just continue reading your book. That's how I've grown so much. Now, this is important. This part here is a cheat sheet. This is for you to copy and fill out, right? Teaching people how to read your book. So, fill these out without them overlapping and stay consistent with these rules. Your readers will grow used to your writing style after the first few pages, but you have to stay consistent to keep them engaged to allow the story to become subconscious in their mind. Generally speaking, what this means is the same way people in my tense video, right, previously in the playlist, I mentioned past and present tense. Past is the general expectation, but if you write in present tense, after the first few pages, it disappears in people's mind, it becomes invisible. But if you keep swapping between them, it annoys people, right? It's the same thing for this. So you're going to copy this and you're going to fill it out. And I showed you how mine is filled out down here. So these are my rules. Dialogue is double quotes for dialogue. Inner thoughts is single quotes for inner thoughts. Chanting spells, right? Regular dialogue for chanting spells because my characters chant out loud because it's a chant, right? Telepathy. Single quotes and italics for telepathy. But I also stated in a dialogue tag beforehand. So before the sentence happens, you have to state telepathy, right? Not afterwards, because you might confuse your audience. Because of this, it will rarely be used in my books. So I have to write around these limitations. It impacts what my characters can do, what kind of stories I can tell. Like I currently have a character who's going to learn some telepathy, but I can't have it show up much because it might confuse the audience a bit, right? So I'm using it very sparingly. So example, he sent a thought into Tim's mind. Then you have single quote, italics. We need to go left. Full stop. Single quote, right? Yeah, although like I mentioned it a couple times beforehand, the full stop before or after the quote, it doesn't really matter that much. So just pick whichever one you're comfortable with. I think I flip flop between them, but you can fix that in the editing phase. Emphasis, I personally don't use this because of my dialogue tags. So my dialogue and my subtext and character blocking fills this role, but emphasis usually overlaps, right? Because people who use italics for emphasis and italics for inner thoughts mix it up. And then if you use single quotes for inner thoughts and then single quotes for emphasis, it also overlaps. And bold doesn't show up most of the time, right? And all caps is definitely not the way to do emphasis. It's just very jarring because it seems like somebody screams something in the middle of a sentence. Okay? So I write around emphasis. Most books don't have all of these things. So generally you can just grab one and use that for emphasis. But I usually just use subtext and character dialogue and tags and blocking for that, which I'll explain in my sentence structure, which is the next video, right? It'll be sentence structure, dialogue, and descriptions, right? It'll be like a pretty, I'll say longer video, 40 minutes maybe. Now, prose and writing style. This is the meat of it. This is everything. Prose is effectively stage text, right? Stage text, not script. Text messages like WhatsApp, Instagram messages, Facebook messages, etc. are script, which means person's name, colon, what they say, next line, repeat over and over and over, going back and forth maybe. How you combine the guidelines above forms your writing style. Your writing style is your voice. It's the one thing you can't learn from somebody else. You have to figure this out yourself. Don't try to copy anyone because that would delay your process by however long it takes you to figure out. You have to do it yourself. Just write one story for long enough and your style will naturally form. If you are a short story writer, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Okay? Short story writers have a problem where their writing style changes with every short story because they have to think about everything going on in every single scene because it's only a few scenes. So, here's how I'm going to explain this. This happens after you stop thinking about your characters, etc. The scenes begin flowing because you've been writing the same story long enough to understand the characters, etc. Enough that it becomes subconscious. At that point, your writing style truly forms. So, in your first couple chapters, you're thinking about the character, how they think, how they speak, what words they use, how they stand in a scene. But when you grow familiar enough with a character, all of that becomes subconscious. It's kind of like how the first time you're learning to walk, you have to think about your balance. But assuming you can walk, right? But now when you're walking, you don't think about that. You just think about where you want to go. When you get to the point where you only have to think about where the scene needs to go and you don't have to think about every single detail along the way, that's when your writing style forms. For most people that I've spoken to, this takes around 50,000 words writing the same story with the same characters, so you get into a rhythm. If you write third limited, where each chapter is one character's point of view, this will take longer because you have to intentionally make each chapter feel different depending on which character you're following. If you write first person with just one main character, this will be much shorter, so you can get this done within like 15,000 words. But you also have to take characterization into account, so it depends how well you know your character before you start writing. So people usually say, oh yeah, well, you have to fill out a character sheet and figure out what their favorite meal is. No, the answer is volume. You cannot, there is no shortcut to this, right? For me, I think this took around 80,000 words. So story time, when I decided to write, was the first day I uploaded anything from Elementalist. No editing, nothing, just raw, terrible writing quality. But I sat down and I wrote 64 chapters within 36 hours without sleeping. I didn't get up from the desk to do anything but like get food and go to the bathroom. Didn't even shower. 36 hours, non-stop, and I got 64 chapters done, which was around 112,000 words, but around 80,000 words, which is a small tournament arc. I figured out my writing style, how I wanted my camera to move around the scene. So for this, you have to just do volume. You have to get it out there, which is why when people take 10 years to write a book, the book usually sucks. because they take 10 years to write a 70,000 page and 70,000 word book, and the book sucks because they don't have a formulated writing style, because they've spent 10 years writing the same 70,000 words over and over and over and over. So you have to do the work, you have to do the volume, you have to write more. That's the cheat code to writing. Write more. Now, consider this barrier a weight that will continuously hold you back until it is removed. You can't study to get rid of this. You have to simply do the work. It is a labor of self-discovery, right? Nobody can teach you this. You can't copy from anybody. It is how your brain works. It is unique to you. This is what makes your story worth reading above everybody else's for the most part, right? Now, this part's important if you speak multiple languages, or you're somehow learning in this video or seeing this video and you don't speak English. I only speak English. Language and grammar. For narration, when learning to write, it is best to follow the grammar rules of the language you are writing in, especially if that language isn't popular. So if you speak a language that only a few million people speak, and you're writing in that language, follow the rules as strictly as you can for narration. Follow it to a T, right? Because machine translation, so automatic translation, is good enough to auto-translate most languages into the popular languages. So they can translate most of them into English or Chinese or Mandarin or like that kind of stuff, right? And they can especially translate English and Mandarin into each other if you follow all of the grammar rules very strictly. It's decent at translating that. This is most flexible for first person because everything is considered inner thoughts or dialogue. So in first person, everything is from the character's point of view and the character is the narrator. So for that, you're going to have some incorrect grammar if your character is showing, because people don't usually speak in perfect grammar. And that's because dialogue and inner thoughts don't have to follow perfect grammar, because again, people don't speak in perfect grammar, right? As I just said. So if your character, and then the next thing is dialect, which is a different thing. This is Hagrid from Harry Potter, right? In the books, in the movies too. If your character has an accent, you can write the words to show that, or simply add into the dialogue tag. So if they have a lisp, you can write things misspelled because that's how they speak, or you can say he says, she says with a lisp, right? Now, there are two sides to this. One is a very, very, very small portion of people love dialect. They love this gimmick. And the other side is that most people absolutely hate this because it kicks them out of the story, because they've been flowing with the words and then suddenly they have to figure out this puzzle that you're putting into the lines, and they don't like that. It breaks their immersion in the story, and then they have to actually start using their brain to figure out what you're trying to say. So generally, I would say don't do this, but if you want to, go ahead. Just understand the trade-off you're making. Some people are going to get to this part and be like, okay, yeah, this is not for me, and they might skip it. Personal note, if your writing style doesn't follow proper sentence structure, focus on making the point clear. Personally, for me, I don't always have proper sentences or grammar, right? Because I often remove words that people would say are mandatory in a sentence to provide emphasis, right? A lot of purple prose is actually just removing words. That's the cheat code to purple prose. Picking better words and then removing the extra stuff. So I drop words to remove emphasis or set atmosphere, and I leave in adverbs for the same reason. And I know one of the rules you'll hear a lot is, oh my god, take out all your adverbs. Those people suck. I'm just gonna say that. Or at least their writing style is very bland. Because adverbs have character. That's part of the character of the narration, right? Some of them I'll take off because they are necessary, but like people who say remove every single adverb, no, don't take that advice. Do it at your discretion. So as I said, your writing style will determine this, but the important thing is your readers understand what you're trying to say. Some people try to make their writing too flowery, and then people don't understand what's going on in a scene and have to read it 2 or 3 more times. Don't do that. Don't be that person, please. Because that will make people put down your book, and if they put down your book, they might never pick it up again. Yeah. So, the next important thing is reading grade. I'll keep this simple. The lower the grade as much as possible. There is a statistic where in the last couple US elections, the person who spoke at the lower reading grade won. because they spoke to the largest audience, because people could understand what they were saying. More people could understand what they were saying. And the United States election is the biggest popularity contest on the planet. This is why they say for a job interview, shave your face, because if you want to get elected as president, a very popular statistic is that you have to shave your face. They even mentioned this in the last Captain America movie with Sam Wilson, Captain America. Thunderbolt Ross said, yeah, he had to either shave his face or lose the election. And writing, like it or not, is a popularity contest. You want the majority of people to be able to read and understand and enjoy and buy your book. So lower the reading grade. Okay? Because higher reading grade is higher barrier to entry equals fewer readers, fewer customers, right? And something that's unavoidable for sci-fi people especially, because they love to just word vomit at you with their technology stuff. Magic people too, fantasy people too, right? Your magic / technology system may be incredible, but nobody cares about it at the beginning of the book. So when you start explaining everything with big words, you will lose everyone except the super hardcore people in the fantasy and sci-fi, which is a very small minority. They're loud and obnoxious, but they're very small, which means you have very limited customer base with that, right? So what I do for reading grade is I would finish what I'm writing, and I would throw it in here, pro-writing aid, not sponsored yet. But they have wow, what is this? They have a feature that lets you actually check out if your reading grade is high or low. So you will see some editing on the side. Wow. Never mind. But yeah, usually you put it in here, and then one of the things in the side is the reading grade. It will show up on the right side. So yeah, you can always just pick one of these. There are a bunch of other websites that do this for free, right? Reading grade, and it will tell you which words are too big, which words are too small. But your magic and sci-fi system is the one exception. If that is complicated, let it be complicated, but don't string it along in like a 3-page info dump that nobody understands, right? But explaining your magic system is something I'll go over and have a couple other videos, not in this playlist because this is basic writing, but that'll be in more advanced videos. Now we get to the big one, because people love to argue this, right? Purple prose versus clear prose. Okay. Now, purple prose is written to flow like poetry. This is done by strategically choosing words and removing them when necessary. As I said, incorrect grammar sometimes sounds better, or reads better, or just has more emphasis. If you want each sentence to be art, this is what you're trying to do. Clear prose is a medium for the story. Okay? Purple prose is air that smells really nice. Clear prose is just air. Okay, it's invisible, it just lets you understand the story and get into the story itself. Clear prose isn't a feature of the story, just a vehicle for the reader to get details. You don't have to pick one or the other. So when people say they're trying to write purple prose, it normally means their prose is gonna suck. Because if you're trying to write purple prose, then your purple prose is gonna be very, very crappy. And if you're trying to write clear prose, then your book is going to be very dry. So don't think about this. Let your readers tell you which one you are. Okay, just write your story in your voice, with your style, and your readers will tell you if you're purple prose or clear prose. Most people swing back and forth, but at least I do, and some people I've seen do, depending on what scene they're writing. So if it's a very generic, like a walking scene, they'll just have regular clear prose, right? If it's a beautiful meadow, the person's looking at that with the flowers and rivers and stuff, they'll lean more into descriptive, flowery, purple prose, and then they'll go back and forth and back and forth. So don't think about this. Just write your story and let your readers tell you which one you are. So as I said at the bottom here, intentionally trying to write purple prose often makes your story too flowery and esoteric, right? People don't understand what's going on in the scene. And intentionally trying to make clear prose makes your story lifeless and bland. So nobody wants either, but hopefully they want your story. So just write your story as you want it to be, and your readers will tell you exactly what category you fall into. Because it's just, at the end of the day, it's a feature if you do purple prose, but it's not a detriment if you don't. So really, nobody cares that much, right? And you have a million other things to worry about, so just let this be in the background. Your readers will tell you which one you are. Now that's it for this video. Like, subscribe, comment any questions you have, or just tell me hi. And if you want to talk to me or DM me or a suggestion, just join the Discord. There's a writing group in there. All my links are down below, and the next video will be sentence structure, dialogue, and descriptions. And after that, we're gonna actually start writing or planning our book and then writing it, because I'm going to be writing it live and then giving it away for free in this playlist. So yeah, I hope to see you all around for the next one, and get to writing. Have a good one.